Everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be doing just a really quick support tier list overview for each role. So let me know what you think about this. I've been doing this on the last few patches. I would have liked to have released this a bit earlier, but I've just been really sick this week. I am feeling a lot better today, though, so hopefully we can keep that trend going. But I have released an in-depth support tier list, so be sure to check that out if you want the in-depth information about support. Obviously, support is what I'm going to be most knowledgeable about because that's what I play in ranked, but I'm going to try to give you some information about all the roles. So if you enjoy this, please be sure to like and subscribe. I do have to meet a friend here in about 30 minutes or so I'm going to have to do this pretty quickly in 20-25 minutes. So let's go ahead and get in here. All right, so support, we're just going to go over this just really quickly because, like I said, I already have a separate video about it, so be sure to check that out if you want the in-depth stuff. But I still think Soraka is going to be near the top. She is the highest, or she's the second highest win rate by a 1/10%, but she's just super strong. In the laning phase, you can pretty much go even against almost anybody. She heals herself for a ton with her Q, and you can pass that on to your ally as well. If you even land like 1 out of every 3 Qs or so, you're probably going to be winning the laning phase. The only way that you really stop her in the laning phase is if you have a really hard all-in engage and a ton of burst damage. So like if you have Leona, Nautilus, and like Draven or Misfortune or Jhin or something like that, which those are pretty popular comps right now, but as long as you don't die in the laning phase, and usually she can go about even, if they don't kill you in one shot, you're going to sustain through it, then she's just kind of the queen of the mid game and the late game. You know, once you get all that extra gold from not having to buy a ward item, and you can invest in things like Mikhail's and Redemption earlier on, just gives you a ton of power. She has huge scaling with her plus healing and shielding. The biggest thing that sets her apart from other healers and shielders is the 2-second cooldown on her heal. It's like a 200 baseline heal on a 2-second cooldown. You know, something like Janna by comparison is going to be, you know, a 12-second base cooldown on her shield for 240. So Soraka can get off, you know, in theory, 5 or 6 heals by the time Janna gets off 1 shield. So that's one of the huge differences. Also, her ultimate affects the entire map and is virtually instant. So that's just like the ultimate roaming tool. It's partially why Karthus became really popular in the jungle for a while there, is he could roam without even roaming. He could gank without ganking, you know. He just like power farm the jungle and then just press R, you know, anytime anything's going on around the map. Soraka is kind of like that, right? Where you can just kind of stay in lane, or you can be warding or rotating, or just anytime, anywhere, you can just drop your ult and take over the game. Now, a lot of people are going to get grievous wounds and try to focus you out in fights, but if you go for the build that I recommend, that I talk about in the support tier list and that I do on stream all the time, where you run Barrier and then Guardian instead of Airy, then you actually have quite a bit of protection from yourself if they try to all-in you, because you can Barrier, proc your Guardian, drop Redemption on yourself, you know, press your ultimate, hit your Q to gain some extra healing and some extra movement speed. So it's actually a lot more difficult if you have that build to focus out Soraka than you would think, especially if you're positioning well. Like, they're going to have to use a lot of resources on you in a team fight, and you're still going to get a lot of value, right? Your Redemption's still going to go off. If you press ult, it's still going to heal everybody. So usually if they are spending everything to come kill you in a team fight and you're still getting value, you're probably going to win the fight anyways, even if they kill you. So I think she's still going to be the strongest right now. Rakan's another one who's really good. Now, Rakan is not getting a lot of love for some reason on a lot of other tier lists out there. I think that's ludicrous. I mean, this guy is always good and competitive. Since he was released, I guess there was a very small window when they nerfed the movement speed on his W, where he was having some problems. I mean, he's always strong, especially in high tier play. But even in like lower tiers, I think that he's still really good. I mean, he's got really good mobility with his W, so he's very hard to kill on ganks. You can ward very aggressively and get away a lot of times. And he's one of the only champs that has one of the best hard engages in the game with his R plus W. And he can also get back out with his E. Nobody else does that. You know, if Nautilus or Leona goes in, they're staying in most of the time. You're not going to be able to get back out. And so because he's so nimble, then that gives him a lot more versatility with his itemization. He can actually go for some enchanter items if you want to add more utility and offense to your team. So you can get stuff like Ardent Censer or Athene's Unholy Grail or Redemption if you want to. Versus, you know, a Nautilus and Leona, you got to get a bunch of tank stuff or you're just going to get blown up most of the time. So he can do that, you know, he can go for a Zeke's Night's Vow if you want, but if you're ahead, if your ADC is like 4-0 out of the laning phase, you can get an Ardent Censer to go with your Zeke's to double down on the on hit. Or if you have a bunch of meatballs on your team, you know, an Olaf, a Darius, that type of stuff, you can go for a Shirelia's to help your team engage. So he's just so versatile. He's so safe most of the time, and he scales really well. His shield has a 1.6 AP ratio on it, and I think the base is like a 300 shield. So it's really, really good on like an 8-second cooldown once you max it out. So very strong champion, super versatile. I just think that he's pretty much always going to be tier 1 in almost any meta. He's the best one trick out there. He's pretty much always good. Okay, Nautilus is another one who's still going to be really strong. He has fallen off a little bit win rate wise, but he's just a menace. He has so much CC. He does a lot of AoE team fight damage with his E spam. He wave clears pretty well with his E spam, which is very relevant when you're trying to push to get priority for Scuttle or Dragon, or for a good rotation or deep wards in the enemy jungle. He's very good at that. And then his ult has a point click. You know, it's going to knock them up. They're probably going to die unless they have Hourglass or Stopwatch. And it can hit multiple people in team fights. So I just think that he has the best selection of CC for team fights. Puts out really respectable damage with his E without having to itemize into damage. And so I think he's going to be really good. He can actually escape a decent amount with his Q too. If you use the Q to engage, obviously you can't use it to escape. But if you're getting ganked, you can use that Q to hook to a tower to get out of some sticky situations sometimes. So he's not like as safe as Rakan, but he's safer than someone like Leona in my book. So I still think he's going to be pretty strong here. Now, Zyra is someone that I've been talking about for a while too. A lot of people have been talking about. She's been floating around tier 1 or tier 2. I did try her out some more on this patch, and she feels pretty good into certain matchups. She does do a lot of poke damage early on. It does hurt that Frostfang doesn't give mana anymore. So that is a major issue. You kind of have to buy a Fairy Charm early now. They are thinking about bringing back the mana regen on the next patch, so I think they're going to lower the stats a little bit on the completed item, is what they're talking about doing on 10.1. Obviously, I'll have a video that covers that when it comes out in early January. But they're thinking about bringing the mana regen back. But for now, it does kind of hurt in the early game. And if you fall behind, her items are very expensive, so it can be really difficult to get good backs. You'll find yourself, if you're not really far ahead, constantly backing with like 600 gold, and you have to choose, okay, do I just buy nothing and wait on that blasting wand, or do I get another amp tome, even though I don't have anything to build it into right now? You know, once you get your Sork boots plus your Oblivion orb. So her backs can feel a little weird, especially in the mid game, because, you know, enchanters can always back and just like grab some fairy charms and it'll build into something, right? Regardless of whatever your gold is. You have 600 gold, no problem. You get boots and 3 fairy charms, or amp tome, you know, and a couple of fairy charms and control wards. You just don't have the same level of flexibility with your build with Zyra, and that can feel bad if you're waiting on those blasting wands, but you just don't have the gold on your backs to get them. So she can be good. She puts out a lot of pressure early, has really good team fights, excellent scuttle control, good wave clear. She is very vulnerable to ganks, no mobility, but if you need an AP damage threat on your team, or you just really want to push hard and try to get a major advantage early on and get those dragons, Zyra can be solid. Now, Janna's another one who is pretty good right now. She does have the highest win rate, obviously, so that's going to be solid. My whole thing with Janna is it feels like her laning phase is really weak to me. I know that she can go for the Comet build and get 3 points in W, and then you take Scorch and sometimes even Cheap Shot, and that she can spam W and do some okay poke. And that's true, but I think that Soraka crushes her most of the time because Soraka can heal in the laning phase, and Soraka is just going to out heal her later on in the game. So I think that's a really bad matchup for Janna in general. And like Soraka can silence from a distance whenever Janna tries to use her ult. So I think that's a bad matchup. And then also, you know, matchups like Nautilus and Leona, it seems like she should be really good into those, but in the early game, it can actually be kind of tricky, especially if you don't tornado fast enough. And if you ever take a bad trade, she's terrible against Zyra in the early game too. You don't have a heal, and your shield is on a really long cooldown. You know, it's like on an 18-second cooldown. So she's okay. Like, she does have good peel. The scaling with the AD that you get off the shield is pretty nice. Just most of the time, I would rather take Soraka. But if you do want something that's going to be a little bit safer, maybe something that has a bit more mobility to rotate around the map to try to make plays, then Janna can still be pretty solid. If you have a really good ADC, like I think if you have a strong ADC that's going to be getting crit, which is a lot of ADCs, then Janna might be better than Soraka if you think you can make it through the laning phase, because the extra 40 or 50 damage that you give them off of your shield when they have a lot of crit generates a lot of extra damage. So there is that to be said about her, is that she does make your AD carry scale really hard if you think your AD carry is going to be really good. And then finally, Senna, I think, is pretty solid overall. They did nerf her a lot, but she still has good early poke. Her W still provides a ton of CC in the mid game. She can get executioners early on, so that your ADC doesn't have to, which is really good against Soraka. Then you have, you know, your AoE healing with your Q, your global. So she still has all of her stuff. I think she's really good in the laning phase, but starts to fall off later on in the game. Kind of has Zyra-itis, where her items are just really expensive if you want to go for the 80 items, and I think that's kind of what you have to build. I've tried the Athene's Redemption build, and it just feels really anemic a lot of the time. Some people still do it, but I think you want to be going for that the lethality item, the Umbral, whatever it's called, and then something like a Ghost Blade or a Dust Blade, and those items are just going to be more expensive than Enchanter items. So if you do get ahead, it can be really nice, but if you don't, it can feel kind of awkward too. Okay, let's talk about the ADCs here really quick. So, I think Caitlyn is the best overall right now. Now, there are some people who aren't good with Caitlyn at lower elo brackets. She's not going to be as strong. Like, the best way to think about Caitlyn is she's a lot closer to something like Jhin than she is to Jinx. And I think a lot of people try to play her like Jinx, where you're just sitting there, just auto-attacking a lot. Whereas, really, you're looking for that combo. You're looking for that burst damage off of your headshots. And so a lot of people don't play her correctly, but if you have really good trap control, if you're really good at landing, you know, net Q auto for like the big damage combos, she can be very strong. Now, one thing about Caitlyn that has changed that's very different from the past is that the Storm Razor into Infinity Edge into like double crit cloak is extremely strong right now. And that's what I was calling at the start of the preseason, and people are just now starting to build it, where you go, you know, like I said, Infinity, Storm Razor, double crit cloak. And that means she doesn't have a weak mid game anymore. Before, she used to have a really weak mid game when you had to go double Zeal item. You'd go like Infinity Edge plus Rapid Fire Cannon plus, you know, like Static Shiv or something like that in Season 7. And she was still a menace back in Season 7. But the problem is her base attack speed is super slow. It's like 0.56, which means she doesn't get a lot of value out of attack speed items. So if you didn't know, like, how that works is if you were to have like 100% extra attack speed and your attack speed was 0.5, then that means you would have a, you know, 1.0 attack speed, one attack every minute. But if you had a 0.75 and you got 100% attack speed, then you would have a 1.5 attack speed, which would be way faster. So certain AD carries that auto attack a lot, like Vayne, are going to have a much higher base attack speed, usually like a 0.65 or so, sometimes even higher than that, versus champions that are supposed to be more of kind of siege champions or like burst champions, like Senna, Jhin, and Caitlyn are going to have really low base attack speed. So you don't want attack speed on those champions most of the time. And the big problem is there just was not a very good like AD plus crit item other than Infinity Edge. You could go Essence Reaver on Caitlyn, but it wasn't as strong as the new Storm Razor is. So the changing of Storm Razor to include crit and to remove a lot of the attack speed in exchange has been very, very good for a lot of these top-end ADCs. And Caitlyn is one of the best because now she doesn't have that weak mid-game. It's just a really strong 1-item, 2-item power spike, and then 2 more crit cloaks, and that's your late game, and you're busting everybody up. So I think that has been something that's helped her tremendously. Also, the meta right now, just kind of the push and poke, take towers, rotate, get scuttle, get dragons, just get priority in all of your lanes, has made her very strong. I think she's the most banned AD carry right now. One of the most banned. Okay, so she's the 4th most banned AD carry. Yasuo just gets banned for other roles because people hate him. But yeah, these champions are all pretty good right now. Okay, so speaking of which, Senna, we mentioned Senna earlier. I think that she's a lot better as ADC because she has a better build path because you're actually getting money. So, you know, having slightly more expensive items is good. But she does actually get to cheat the curve a little bit because she can use Mana Mune. And any champion that can use that effectively, it's a very, very cost efficient item. It's only 2,400 gold. So that is pretty nice. It does allow her to spam her abilities early. She does have very powerful cooldowns with her Q. It's self-sustain, it's poke, it sustains your support. And having a lot of just flat AD off of Mana Immune means that her crit is going to have more value. Because she's itemized so weirdly where you don't want attack speed and you also don't really want crit that often on her, at least not in the early game. Because she gets like negative crit modifiers. So she's just kind of an odd duck. Like really what you want is just a lot of AD. And then lethality is pretty good too. So a lot of times you'll see people going Mana Immune and then either Ghostblade or Dustblade. And a lot of times they'll do both of those. Because the Mana Immune, whenever you use your Q, it applies the on-hit to everybody that gets hit with the Q. And so it does a lot of extra damage. I'm pretty sure it does. That does a lot of extra damage once you get the Mana Immune fully stacked up. So she can do quite a surprising amount of burst. Although she still doesn't do that much great sustain damage. But she just has so much utility. You know, having that cloud in the mid game to speed everyone up and confuse everybody with the E. Having your ult, which does like a pretty large amount of damage and puts out a nice shield. You know, having your Q for the poke and the sustain. She's just got a lot. And her W for like potentially AoE, CC, and team fights. She has a lot of utility. So she's not going to typically be the best, like, you're just sitting there and trying to hack through a Mundo or something like that. But if you have a really good supporting cast, then she can be quite strong. Jen is the other one that I want to mention here. Very similar to like I was talking about with Caitlyn, just really benefits from this itemization, going Infinity Edge, Storm Razor, 2 crit cloaks, super strong on him. Very good 1, 2.5 item power spike there. Great pressure early, great push with his grenades. Excellent combo. They increased the CC duration on his W a while ago, so it's awesome paired with something like a Leona or Nautilus or just anything that's going to have some good CC on it. Rakan. So he can definitely bust people up and do a lot of damage. And he's one of the biggest beneficiaries of the crit cloak changes because every time he crits, he gets a huge amount of movement speed. So it allows you to reposition, chase people down, kite. So getting those crit cloaks is strong. It might even be possible that you just straight go Infinity Edge 3 crit cloaks on Jhin and just skip the Storm Razor early on just because he wants it that bad. So, yeah, Jen's going to be really good right now. Miss Fortune is another one who's pretty strong. She does kind of go for a crit build. Now, I haven't seen if she's doing Storm Razor as much. She was doing Infinity Edge Essence Reaver. Essence Reaver's really good on her because you get the 20% cooldown reduction for your ult, which is very handy. But yeah, she puts out a ton of poke early on with her Q in the laning phase, and she has an awesome team fight mechanic with her ult. So she's going to put out some of the most damage of any ADC out there in a team fight as long as she has protection so that you can hold people still. So excellent with things like Leona, Rakan, Nautilus in those early team fights, going for the dragon, going for the rift. She's going to be the queen of that. So very, very good team fight ADC. Also very fast, so she can go back, get preferable back timings, rotate around, help out on invades, help out on scuttle fights. So she's just really, really fast for an ADC, and that's really helpful too. And that's something a lot of people don't think about unless you play her a lot or play with her a lot. Okay. We'll leave here in like 10 minutes. We'll leave in about 10 minutes. So Aphelios is going to be still pretty good. I'll be honest, I don't fully understand everything that he does yet, but I just know when I see a good Aphelios, he does a lot of damage, especially once he starts doing that flamethrower in team fights. It just does a ton of damage. And then that Gravitum, being able to get the root on somebody is clutch. Like, that sets up so many plays in the early to mid game. So I think he's very good. He has good range. It feels like he does a lot of damage in team fights with his ult, especially the flamethrower. I know they just nerfed that on this patch, but I think he has the potential to be really good. It's just, it is kind of big brain. Like, his mechanics themselves aren't that hard, but knowing which gun to use and where and plan ahead on your ammo and just know, like, okay, there's a team fight coming up, so I'm going to hold on to my fire ammo, so I'm going to use this other gun instead. He can be very, very strong. So he's already at 52%, and a lot of people just don't understand what the hell he does. And I'm the same way. I'm like, what? You know, I know to, like, stay away from some of his guns, but He just feels really, really strong right now. And then Heimerdinger did get nerfed on this patch, but he's a good alternative if you do want an AP bot lane. He does push. He has great zone control. Takes dragons really quickly. Can take towers pretty quickly. So I think that Dinger is still pretty respectable if you're good on him. Okay, mid lane, and then we got to go through these a bit quicker here because we only have about 10 minutes or so left. Ahri, and this hasn't changed that much since the last time, but Ahri's still going to be very strong, just very versatile, good wave clear, multiple dashes. She can snowball pretty hard if she gets ahead. Just a nice, safe pick, I think, for a lot of people out there. So if you're auto-filled ADC or you just want to try her out, she almost always has a pretty high win rate, and she's fairly easy to play, very forgiving if you're out of position. I think her win rate is down a little bit. Diana's probably preying on her a bit, but she's still going to be good. Fizz, great, goes untargetable with his dash. It's really hard to lock down. If you hit him with the fish, it's almost guaranteed you're going to kill him unless they have Hourglass. If they have Hourglass, that can be annoying. But, you know, you just fish them, go in with your E, and as soon as you land it, they're dead, and you can probably get away. So, does a ton of damage. He's one of the few, like, mainstream AP, like, hard burst assassins, and that's really useful because a lot of times you're going to still have AD in the jungle, AD top lane, and AD bot lane. So having that AP assassin option in the middle is really good. Diana is actually becoming quite strong right now. She definitely deserves to be tier 1. People are figuring her out. She does pretty good sustained damage, okay burst. A lot of people are doing kind of this funky build on her with Ardent Censer and Nashor's Tooth right now. Because the Ardent Censer, whenever you shield yourself, then it applies the Ardent Censer buff. So you get some pretty nice value out of that. Over time, they're probably going to nerf that pretty soon. I think it was a bug that came up maybe like 5 patches ago that wasn't documented. Hi, Rory. How you doing? How are you? Good job. But yeah, so Diana's going to be pretty good right now. Malzahar, pretty much always solid. I always recommend him for most people. He's kind of like Ahri. He's just, you know, standard, has nice push, good threat on Baron, on towers, takes him fairly well. He can press R, you know, excellent for ganks. So it's a really good, solid champ. You can power farm with him. You can roam with him. A lot of options. Very easy to play. Heimerdinger, talked about him before. Excellent, especially against melee champions in the mid lane. And then Katarina's someone that's been coming up a lot lately that I've noticed where she's really good to one trick. Like, you can just start taking over games, doing a ton of damage, has a lot of mobility. If the enemy team doesn't have point-click lockdown CC, she is extremely difficult to deal with. Also, her ult, adding that 60% healing debuff is pretty huge against things like a Soraka. So, I think she's going to be clutch. Now, there are a lot of champs that are good right now in general. You just can't mention them all from mid lane. I have been seeing Echo's still pretty good in the mid lane. He's excellent in the jungle right now. Still pretty solid in mid. And then Kassadin did get nerfed last patch, but I've been seeing him too as a counter to mages, and he's really quite a menace too, especially if he gets ahead. So there's quite a diversity of pretty good things in the mid lane right now. I don't like the ranged, like the high range mages, like the Vel'Koz and the Lux. I think there's just a bit too much mobility in the game to make those work, although you can make them work. It's just a little bit harder. Then I have seen Orianna as well in several games be really good with some of these hard engaged tanks that you see in some other roles, you know, like a Zac or a Nautilus or even a Nocturne. If you have a Nocturne jungle or Nocturne top, Orianna can have a pretty good combo. Some of the assassins are still going to be good too. Your Kianas, your Zeds, your Talons are going to be pretty solid. Ryze has definitely fallen off after those most recent nerfs. But if you're really good on him, you can make him work too. Okay, last couple of roles here. Olaf, I still think it's going to be the king of the jungle. He has awesome clear, great dueling power, takes dragons really quickly, has pretty good scaling into the mid game. If he falls behind, it does suck, but he can kind of go wherever he wants and do whatever he wants, you know, in the early game. His ganks aren't amazing pre-6, but just the raw damage that he puts out does make him very valuable. So if your team can build around him, if your team has a lot of stuff to speed people up or to CC people, he can definitely crank out the DPS. Nunu is going to be one of my overall favorites as well, especially at lower elo brackets. He just kind of does it all, has great clear, really good CC, excellent tank, great team fighting. Actually, surprisingly, pretty good ganks in the early game with that snowball. You can get around a lot of wards. You can just run straight up the lane with that snowball a lot of times, especially against some of these immobile champs that don't have a lot of dodges, you know, like Aphelios, like Jen or Caitlyn. the Nunu can be quite the menace. And he scales pretty well, too, over time, just because he can get so many defensive items and becomes pretty difficult to kill with the combination of Spirit Visage and the healing off of his Q. And obviously, he's God mode on objectives. You know, you're just not going to take it. You're not going to take Baron. You're not going to take Dragon from him. So I think Nunu's still going to be really strong. Now, Lee Sin is one that I always hesitate to recommend to people, but I have seen some God mode Lee Sins. Maybe it's just like the low diamond. That's where they all end up. I don't know. But I've seen a ton of really, really strong Lee Sins lately. He stacks up Conqueror so quickly. He has such good AD ratios on it. Gives him some pretty good healing. He has some of the best dueling in the early game. Really good sneaky ganks that he can get in there. So he's just very versatile. The big thing about Lee is he seems to fall off in the late game, but getting that extra 50 AD or whatever off of Conquer and getting that lifesteal, when he gets other lifesteal too, I think it's off of his W, combined with the lifesteal off of Conquer, just kind of puts him over the top. So it just feels like he does a ton of damage, and he's actually quite hard to kill, and he's very disruptive later on in the game. So it feels like he can actually go like kind of full damage, and then just having so much extra AD and sustain just seems to be really strong on him right now. So he doesn't have the highest win rate in the game, but I've just personally seen him just take over games a lot lately. So I do think that Lee is definitely worth considering. Even though it seems like he shouldn't be that great against tanks, just his early game presence is so strong that, and the Conqueror, like I said, just allows him to still have a pretty good mid game as well. Warwick's going to be pretty good too. I don't like that you have to build the Tiamat on Warwick. It feels a little wonky, but overall he does have good clear. I just think of him as just kind of a worse Nunu, but he can brawl. He can do a bit more damage. He does have a rundown mechanic if someone's like bleeding. So if everyone is always just running around like fighting constantly, you know, the lower your elo, then the better Warwick's going to be. So I think he can be pretty solid. And sort of a similar type of thing is Volibear. Now, Volibear will surprise you. I was really caught off guard in low diamond. This thing, like, he's so hard to kill early on. He does so much damage. He'll chomp you for, like, half your health if you're a squishy. So it seems kind of stupid, like, because he seems like this brain-dead champ. But he does so much damage, and he's so hard to kill if you don't have Grievous Wounds. Also, that Majestic Roar is really, really good if you get good on it. It can shut down a lot of stuff. Like, I've seen him just smack Lee Sin anytime Lee tries to go on him. If you don't know what it does, it like knocks you out of the air if you're airborne and does bonus damage, and I think it stuns you for a little bit, like a little mini stun. So it's just really, really nice versus like there's so many mobile champions. You know, Lee Sin, Zac. This guy was roaring and not like he was going in on the Tristana, and after he flipped her, she tried to jump away and he roared and like pulled her back down. So this guy was a pretty good Volibear. But yeah, it just feels like he does have that outplay potential against mobile champions when he runs at them like that and just does a lot of damage, especially in the early to mid game. So I think Volibear, and his team fighting's okay. I mean, that lightning strike bouncing around to everybody's not terrible. So I think he's a pretty respectable tank, especially if you are countering mobility with the Majestic Roar. I think he can be pretty good. And then Echo's the other one who's super good right now. He's very fast. He's super sticky. He's very difficult to get away from. He does do a lot of AP damage out of the jungle, which is rare. So that's really nice right now that, you know, most of these champions are AD. At least the ones that do damage are AD. So that's pretty handy. He does take dragons a little bit slower than some of his contemporaries and barons, so he doesn't have that going for him. But just his speed, his burst damage, and his scaling is really, really nice from the jungle rolls. I don't know what his win rate is. It's pretty high, but he's going to be pretty strong. Other honorable mentions, I do think that Zac is really good right now as well, as great engages, can scale pretty well. His damage is pretty low, though, so his dueling, like pre-6, is kind of rough. But if you're just like 24/7 ganking, I think he can be good. Master Yi, you know, as always, very strong if he gets to farm up a little bit. If people just leave him alone, he can kill people. Even some of the mega tanks, he can kill pretty well. Hi, what are you doing? Hi, Rory.
I'm eating a bagel.
You're eating a bagel? Yummy. And then Elise is pretty good too, especially if you get higher up the ladder you go, and you can really abuse her tower resets. You can dive people and repel and drop the aggro at very early levels, and if you're landing everything, you have one of the highest burst damage combos because you have 6 different abilities. or I guess at least 5 of them that add to your DPS. So she's going to be pretty strong in the early game. She just falls off real hard if you don't close game. She doesn't team fight very well. She can't split. She doesn't skirmish versus other champs like super well late game. But if you can snowball hard early, then she can be good. And the final group that I'll mention here, and then we got to get out of here, is top lane. So not a lot has changed top. Garen fell off a lot harder than I thought he would after last patch. That is probably the most notable thing. Is I was kind of laughing at the changes, like who cares, but it actually mattered. So I was wrong about that. He's down 4 or 5%. And he just doesn't feel as strong in games. Now, I haven't seen him as much, but I guess the nerf to his E really was a lot more substantial than I thought. But Mordekaiser's kind of the king of the roost up here right now. This champion's super OP, does a ton of damage. So difficult to deal with because you can just ult any gank that comes in and he can force a 1v1. Hi, Rory. So in team fights, what are you doing? What are you doing? In team fights, you know, yeah, someone could buy a Quicksilver Sash. A lot of people don't, though. They won't pay the 1,300 gold. Just if you didn't know this, you can use Quicksilver Sash to get out of the Mordekaiser ult, but so many people won't do that. But even if they do, whatever, you just ult somebody else. Like, there's always somebody that's not going to have that Quicksilver Sash, and he can pretty much 1v1 almost anybody in the Death Realm. So, he's just a menace. He's always going to do something useful in team fights, it feels like. He has a ton of healing. It takes forever to kill him. He puts out heavy damage. He's just really hard to deal with. Especially, like I said, you really can't 2v1 him top lane. He can always ult, you know, and get that 1v1. So, he's super strong right now. And he scales pretty well into the late game as far as, like, his damage and his tankiness go. Darius is the other one. That's kind of been the replacement for Garen. Darius has been pretty good for a while, too. But now that Garen's kind of fallen out a little bit, I think that Darius is coming back. Take Ghost with him top lane. He's just running down people, killing people. Now, I did look this up. I don't have it pulled up here, but someone the other day was talking to me on stream saying that Darius gets movement speed off of his ult. He does not. Okay? He doesn't get any sort of extra movement speed. He just gets reset on his blood timer, and so if he auto-attacks somebody, it puts full stacks on him. Or if he hits him with a Q, it puts full stacks on him, but he does not get extra speed. The extra speed comes from that Ghost, and then if you take Trinity Force after you kill somebody, you do get some extra movement speed off of Trinity Force. So he's just really strong. He's extremely difficult to deal with. You know, that he can 1v1 almost anybody, even large tanks in the top lane. People have to really go far out of their way to outplay him. It's much easier to dominate than it is to dominate him in the laning phase. Now, if he falls behind, he is pretty trash. But he just does so much damage. And even in team fights with those resets, like, he can completely dominate team fights if he just gets one kill. So, Darius is still going to be a menace. Klez, another one who's just kind of a weird champ that's been climbing up a lot in the preseason right now. I'm not exactly sure what's up with that. Maybe some of his bad matchups are disappearing. I know that he probably wasn't great against those ranged champs with Klepto because he doesn't have sustain outside of remounting his beast. So, that is an issue. But yeah, he's just really good. Great dueling. If you get ahead, it's very difficult to get away from him in the top lane. And then he also has awesome team utility on top of that with his ult. He can roam around by himself or with a crew and make some plays to pick people off. So I think he's fantastic. And he's just very sneaky. Like, his mechanic is really weird. A lot of people don't know how to deal with him. And if he gets that mount back in a fight, it's pretty much lights out. So it's going to be almost like a full heal on him. So
it's not so bad.
I think that he's going to be very strong right now. If you want to go ahead and load her up, I'm almost done. Shin is another one that I think has been coming up a lot lately. I've seen him in several games, even some games where he was down like 4 kills and like 30 or 40 CS in the game. Now, our team had to throw a little bit for him to get back in there, but once he got 2 or 3 items, I forgot who he was against. It was someone who was very lane dominant that falls off hard late game. It wasn't Pantheon. I don't think it was Quinn. Jace. So Jace killed 2 towers and, you know, was up all of those things I just said. And then Shin came back and he was still relevant. He's just really hard to kill in team fights. You know, he can split push freely and then use his ult to get to fights anywhere. And then once he gets into the mid game, gets a couple of defensive items and either a Trinity Force or a like a Hydra, a Titanic Hydra. If he gets one of those as an offensive item, he's just really tough to kill. You know, he does nice percentage damage, gets extra attack speed, hits fairly hard. He's got the Twilight Shroud or whatever thing that blocks a lot of auto attacks. So he's very sticky and he's difficult to deal with. So, and he has great ult pressure, great map pressure. So at higher level plays, he's going to be even better if you can coordinate. So I think he's pretty good. I don't think he's necessarily like the greatest in the world, but he's definitely pretty solid. Probably tier 1 or tier 2. I've just got him up here just because I've seen several pretty solid Shins, and his win rate's going up. I mean, 53%, like that's top 4 overall of all champs played in the top lane with almost a 4% play rate. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. And then Yorick, I still think is pretty good. I mean, Malphite, you could put Malphite in there too. It's just kind of like a super simple, brain dead, like effective team fight tank in the top lane. Malphite's the one you should definitely play if you get autofilled top for sure. But Yorick is just like, he's another one kind of like Kled. He's just really weird. A lot of people don't understand how he works, and you can definitely use that to your advantage. If you hit people with the slime or whatever and all your ghouls go on him, he does a ton of damage. Split pushes super well. Take Barons pretty well with the Maiden or Dragon. You can have them split push autonomously while you're pressuring something else. You can have a Maiden pushing top while you're also going to Baron. So there's a lot of different stuff you can do with him. He's really oppressive early, and he's one of the best split pushers in the game. So I think that Yorick's pretty good, especially at like maybe Platinum or Gold and lower. And then finally Ornn, and I know this is going to make Jolty smile out there. Ornn is pretty good lately. I mean, his win rate's been going up. I've seen a couple of Ornns over the last couple of weeks that can really take off. If he gets ahead early, he's actually quite strong, because once he gets 12, if he has 2 of those Ornn items he can upgrade, he's getting a free like 2,000 gold value off of that. And he's just really hard to kill later on in the game. You know, if he gets something like, Frozen Fist plus the upgraded Sunfire or something like that, he's really difficult to deal with. So, and he obviously has really good CC and team fights. He has his Ornn ult. He has his knock up with his Q. He's just very disruptive and does a surprising amount of damage. Once he gets a couple of items. I've even seen like there was a couple of Ornns were doing Trinity Force on him, which I hadn't really seen that, but I saw a mid Ornn with Trinity Force probably last month that actually did all right. I don't recommend that, but he was kicking some butt and taking names for sure. But anyways, that's going to be it. There's several other good champs top lane for the most part that I mentioned before. Fiora is another one who I think is really strong that a lot of people are sleeping on right now. But all that she does is split push. She's not as versatile. And then, of course, if you play something like Akali or Irelia really well, or Ryze, you know, those can still work also. They're just a lot more skill-based than they used to be. But yeah, that's kind of it. Jax is still, like, all right. Mundo, as far as tanks go, can be all right. Malachi has been creeping up a little bit, too. I haven't seen a ton of that, but he's another one kind of like Ornn that's, if you can survive the laning phase, he's got a really good team fight, so... the only one that really stands out is, oh my god, that thing is OP, is Mordekaiser. Right now in the top lane. Darius is, at lower elo brackets, probably OP too, but in kind of mid elo, he's still manageable but good. Anyways, that's going to be it for this tier list. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think about this shorter version. It was kind of necessitated because we got to go. But I'm going to try to see if I can do these shorter, like 30 or 40 minute versions that cover all of the roles. Maybe in the future, if I get a ton more time, I can do like maybe top 10 for each role. But anyways, just to give you some ideas, help you improve your solo queue, maybe enjoy yourself over this holiday break. But anyways, that's going to be it. Have a good day, and we'll see you next time.